So I will now give a presentation on step-by-step introduction of Jetpack Compose. So first of all, please let me introduce myself. I am Junya Matsuyama. I am currently an Android engineer and engineering manager at Merpay. I joined Merpay a little over a year ago, and since then, I have been involved in the development of new features. So maybe that's too light of an introduction. So before that, I worked for a manufacturer developing software for mobile phones, both feature phones and smartphones. After that, I worked for another company developing various mobile apps and services such as social games, SNS, live streaming services, and taxi dispatch services. Now, I will get into the content. This is the agenda. Before talking about the introduction of Jetpack Compose, I will first talk about the structure of the Mercari application. Then I will talk about how we implemented Jetpack Compose, and finally about how it went and what we're going to do with it going forward. First of all, let's talk about the structure of the Mercari app. The Mercari app is currently structured like this. In one application, there's the Mercari part, a Merpay part, and a design system that is shared by both. In reality, the Mercari shops and other services developed by Shozo Inc. are also included, but for the sake of simplicity, we included them in the Mercari part of the app. Also, the design system is not spread across the entire width of the screen because it was created halfway into the project, so it's not applied to all screens. This Mercari part was initially released in 2013, so it is approximately 9 years old. Therefore, even though a certain amount of refactoring has been done, the technical debt has accumulated considerably, and this has caused a decline in development efficiency, which has been a major issue. In contrast, the Merpay part was released approximately 3.5 years ago. It is not without technical debt, of course, but it is not a situation that significantly reduces development efficiency. In this way, the technical situation of the Mercari and Merpay parts of a single app is quite different. They are also in different business phases, which led to different decision-making. For the Mercari part, we decided to refrain from developing new features as much as possible and rebuild everything. In contrast, we decided not to rebuild the Merpay part for the time being, but to continue developing and improving features for business growth. In other words, we wanted to develop the Merpay part as a common part that works together with both the old and new Mercari parts. So how do we go about this? Here is the current repository structure. In order to completely rebuild the application from the ground up, the new Mercari and new design system were created in a new repository. The new repository then has the current repository as a submodule. The new Mercari part was created with Jetpack Compose. So on top of that, we don't use any new repository, especially when building the current app. We will still build and release as before. So for the new Mercari app, this is the situation as far as module referencing is concerned. There are Git modules and Gradle modules, which is a bit complicated, but this time we are talking about the Gradle modules. For the Mercari part, we will use the new one, so we will not use the Mercari related modules in the submodule, but build with the new Mercari, the new design system, and current Mercari and design system, and create AAB APK. Now we have the basis for a full refactoring of the Mercari part in parallel without stopping the new development of the Mercari part. Note that we don't want to continue with this submodule structure indefinitely. Going forward, once the migration to the new Mercari is successful, we first want it to look like this. Instead of pulling in the contents of the submodule specific hash, we will use a subtree to pull in only the necessary code into the new repository with its history. The goal is to eventually stop using the subtree and merge the code back into one repository. The next step is to implement Jetpack Compose. We decided not to immediately rebuild the Merpay part of the site, but we did want to use Jetpack Compose in view of the current situation. First of all, Jetpack Compose is basically a mechanism for the UI part, so we started by checking whether it would be possible to replace only the UI part of Jetpack Compose. Here is the basic architecture of Merpay. This diagram was previously published in Merpay Tech blog. Merpay is structured in a way that combines the ideas of Redux and MVVM. The presentation part uses a library called controller from the conductor library. Input flows from this presentation to the view model, which generates an action in response to that input. The action may flow directly to the store, or depending on the action, a new action may be generated from the response with an API call. The reducer then receives those actions, generates a new state, and reflects that state in the presentation layer, and so on. In other words, it is a unidirectional data flow. But Jetpack Compose, this diagram is taken from Android developers. The diagram is upside down from the previous one, but Jetpack Compose recommends unidirectional data flow. This means that the basic architecture can be introduced by replacing the UI part. This not only means that migration will be relatively easy, but also that a major architectural change is not necessary in terms of compatibility with Jetpack Compose. So we will give it a try. We also did a POC to discuss the implementation direction within the team. This is what the schematic code looked like before Jetpack Compose. In the onCreated method, the view is created from the layout XML in inflator inflate. Although the code is quite abbreviated, there's an element called inputs as a destination for events from the UI, and a method for issuing events has grown up. And the latest current state is collected to update the UI. This is what it looks like when Jetpack Compose is used. Place Compose View in onCreate View and write the composable UI in set content. Inputs and states are passed to the composable method of screen. Then, depending on the state, the display can be divided and the event firing from the UI can be described. So we have completed the migration. The POC for Jetpack Compose for the UI part have been completed. However, most applications do not consist of only one screen. Transitions from one screen to another are essential. So the next step is to think about how to organize the screen transitions. Let's assume that the action group before support was like this. So this is a Redux action. Let's say that only the navigation type action is implemented in another sealed interface. Then by filtering using filter is instance in the relevant interface, only navigation type actions can be extracted. Once only navigation actions are extracted, transitions can be realized by writing transitions for each action. The POC of the transition was also completed. However, there's still more work to be done. The next step is deep link. I didn't clearly describe it in the repository structure diagram, but the application class and the activity with the launcher attribute belong to the Mercari part in that picture, the new Mercari part. In other words, everything has been rewritten. In the previous Mercari application, the style was roughly like this. there is a dedicated activity that receives deep link and processes deep link. It searches for and resolves the resolver, which possesses the deep link, from the intent of the deep link. The resolver is the one for Merpay. At the destination of this resolver, it switches the tab to Merpay or launches another activity that hosts Merpay functions. The important thing to remember is that the Merpay deep link was integrated as information and that the Merpay functions were basically separate activities. Now, let's look at deep link handling in the new application. Deep link in the navigation component is now used. The notation is not XML, but Jetpack Compose notation is used. The format is to pass a list to nav deep links to deep links. So now we can just create the new deep links. However, on the other hand, how can we use the existing Merpay deep link group within this framework? Even if we don't convert Merpay to Jetpack Compose, there are issues that needed to be considered. As I mentioned earlier, for Merpay Deep Link, you first need to change the tab to Merpay tab, and then launch a separate activity for Merpay in a way that is appropriate for the deep link. So how can we do this? For the convenience of the next code, I'm going to move the previous code down a little bit. The content has not changed. The deep link for Merpay was in one place, so we make a list of nav deep link from it and pass it to deep links. This composable holds the Merpay tab inside. By doing this, we were able to realize deep link via Merpay tab. For reasons for space, we have shrunk the top part a little bit. The original Merpay activity startup cannot be handled by the navigation component, so it is handled directly. In the composable, the deep link URI is first extracted. Then, according to that URI, the activity activation is performed.
Okay, so the existing deep link can now be handled. So now that we have a completed POC of all the surrounding concerns, so we can finally go ahead and actually do it. So then we discussed next, which screen is the best to start with? So let me remind you again of the repository structure of this Mercari applications. There are two design systems at this point. The new one is composable and the other one is Android View. So we will write the Merpay function in composable in compliance with new design system. Then it will inevitably look like this. It's implementation on new repository. So then the reference relation is the new Merpay is Merpay is visible to new Merpay, but the new Merpay is basically invisible to the Merpay. Of course, there is a dependency inversion or other method, but it is not visible as it is. So I think that the root of screen transaction may be easier. Also, the design system that was mentioned earlier, it is not identical between new and old in appearance. Some parts looks almost the same, some parts are different. So it seems better for user experience to avoid going back and forth between old and new in a single screen flow. So therefore I still think the root of the screen seems to be a better choice. And so we concluded that the Merpay tabs would be suitable. Actually, there are some other reasons. What is the situation with the other tabs? The first screen that appears after the Merpay app is launched has 5 tabs at the bottom, but except for the Merpay tab, all 4 tabs have been replaced with the Jetpack Compose and the new design system. Therefore, it was felt that relighting this first would be a good idea from the UX perspective. Also, in addition to this Merpay tab, there was actually just a major relight plan for the UI part of the tab in particular. For these reasons, we decided to do this by relighting Milpato screen, not the other existing screens or the new feature screens. The new Milpay tab is still under development, but now I'd like to talk about the result of the implementation and the future plan. First, I will talk about the difficulties. So the performance is difficult. We have many engineers who have been working on Android for a long time. So then we have accumulated a lot of past experience on Android View. So, for example, based on my experience, I know that some feature caused a load problem when using the UI this way, or didn't cause a problem when using UI in that way. And so such expertise is widely shared. And if there's a problem with the library itself, such as a recycler view, they are raised as issues and fixed one by one, starting from the fatal ones. However, the situation is different for Jetpack Compose. In the first place, there is no one who has a 10 years levels of experience, and Jetpack Compose was born not so long time ago, so it is not so matured. Therefore, when there was a problem, it was necessary to separate whether it was a problem of usage or there was a performance problem of the Jetpack Compose itself. Next, it was hard to get used to it. So it was hard to get used to the unique way of idea and usage rules of a Jetpack Compose, such as remembering because the difference was much larger than existing method. As for the dashboard development team, I think we were able to shorten the time to get used to it by pairing up and having frequent technical chats. There were many more good points than those difficult points. First, it is easy to create an XML. I can see everything in one place, so I don't have to go back and forth between XML and hot link files anymore. And also, if you are using XML, please envision a screen with different UIs depending on the state. For example, here it is. I bought a part of the new UI that is under development for the Merpay tab. This part here, this square is switched by switching the card above the square. So display switches in this way. In this kind of case, each pattern of UI is described on XML, and the visibility is switched between visible and gone. That was one of the possible cases. Then it's similar to what I said earlier. If the branching logic and the UI design are in separate files, or if the layout is written in that XML, the visibility of the tools is used to switch the display in the preview and between visible and gone. I had to relight it each time with visible and gone with Jetpack Compose. You can describe in the branching by state, and you can build the preview with a lot of flexibility. If you create both previews, you can also see them at the same time. And also, if you were describing in Jetpack Compose, you don't have to calculate the extra UIs in layout or put it on memory. Also, although it was not the case of the screen, there is a case where individual elements are divided by state in a long list. I think such a case is also one in which declarative UI excels. Some people said that we can set up the visibility with the component. Layered XML is a file, therefore the visibility such as internal and protected defined in a Kotlin, for example, could not be granted. So it is impossible to manage whether each one is exclusive within the module or can be accessed from outside the module. On the other hand, in Jetpack Compose, UI is created with a function. So it's a language function that is active. It is possible to specify the visibility using a language function such as public, protected, internal for the more strict operation. So next is I don't have to write the code for data monitoring. In Jetpack Compose, state changes are monitored on their own and recomposed when changed. So it is no longer necessary to manually collect each state. And also, since recompose only applied while the UI is alive, there's almost no need to worry about lifecycle around it. Next is not about Jetpack Compose itself, but about the library. In the renewal of UI for Merpay tab, this kind of a carousel type UI was adopted, and this requirement was almost feasible with the page layout accompanist. Snapping in the middle was also possible by default. Also, there were requirements that cards that are not centered with spacing between them would be slightly translucent. So, and we realized that requirement with a content padding and item scroll effect indicators are realized indicators. There was a requirement that the area under the card crossfade according to the progress of card switching, but I was able to achieve that by using the page switching progress information in the page state. In the world of Android view, touch UI of a smartphone has been transforming in more than 10 years, and in the process, various libraries have sprung up. Therefore, in order to build the UI you want, necessary functionalities are missing in any of libraries. Also, I was able to achieve the requirements sometimes by using libraries in a different way from what intended. But since it is a new library, specification, definition, and implementation were able to cope with UI, design pattern, and its changes over the past 10 years. We were able to apply it to the development in very straightforward and smooth manner. But well, this one may be in the same situation again in another 5 or 10 years. Finally, I'd like to talk about the future. Well, it's a matter of course, but I would like to change to Jetpack Compose for other things than Merpay tab. It will be after unifying repositories, but the direction is to start from the screen with major changes or to relight it at some point in a certain period of time, just like the Merpay part. We have to decide the direction first. The design systems are separate in Android View and Jetpack Compose. So I'd like to discuss this not only with the Android engineers, but also with designers and iOS team. I think it's probably the former. Also, I've been thinking about changing the Merpay screen transition from conductor to navigation component, which is a topic that I've been avoiding for a long time. So what I mean by that is to be a little more specific. Here is the code for each screen I was showing you before. Here is the conductor controller. The conductor places a router on top of a single activity, and the router switches the controller to realize the screen transition. Yes, each controller has a live hierarchy of views internally. This is similar to the nav controller fragment or composable in the navigation component. So I've been able to get it to work fine as it is. Jetpack Compose can be realized only in the controller, and the similar features are provided in Jetpack Compose. Considering these facts, when functionalities are able to, when functionalities are added or changed in the Jetpack Compose, it is very likely that we will not be able to take 100% advantage of the new functionality provided. So I'd like to make the transition here if possible. So, as you can imagine, it would be quite difficult. So I'm not sure if it is possible. Well, I talked about the current status of a Jetpack Compose in Merpay. I know this is a very unique situation, but I hope there's something that can help you. Thank you very much for your attention.